The Story of Civilization, Volume 1, Our Oriental Heritage, Part 1, by Will Durant. Continued, Cassette 12, Side 1. What then were these Vedas from which nearly all our understanding of primitive India is derived? The word Veda means knowledge. A Veda is literally a book of knowledge. Vedas is applied by the Hindus to all the sacred lore of their early period. Like our Bible, it indicates a literature rather than a book. Nothing could be more confused than the arrangement and division of this collection. Of the many Vedas that once existed, only 4 have survived. The Rig Veda, or knowledge of the hymns of praise, the Sama Veda, or knowledge of the melodies, the Yajur Veda, or knowledge of the sacrificial formulas, and the Atharva Veda, or knowledge of the magic formulas. Each of these 4 Vedas is divided into 4 sections: the mantras, or hymns, the brahmanas, or manuals of ritual prayer and incantation for the priests, the Aranyaka, or forest texts for hermit saints, and the Upanishads, or confidential conferences for philosophers. Only one of the Vedas belongs to literature rather than to religion, philosophy, or magic. The Rig Veda is a kind of religious anthology composed of 1,028 hymns, or psalms of praise to the various objects of Indo-Aryan worship: sun, moon, sky, stars, wind, rain, fire, dawn, earth, etc. Most of the hymns are matter-of-fact petitions for herds, crops, and longevity. A small minority of them rise to the level of literature. A few of them reach to the eloquence and beauty of the Psalms. Some of them are simple and natural poetry, like the unaffected wonder of a child. One hymn marvels that white milk should come from red cows. Another cannot understand why the sun, once it begins to descend, does not fall precipitately to the earth. Another inquires how the sparkling waters of all rivers flow into one ocean without ever filling it. One is a funeral hymn, in the style of Thanatopsis, over the body of a comrade fallen in battle. From the dead hand I take the bow he wielded, to gain for us dominion, might, and glory. Thou there, we here, rich in heroic offspring, will vanquish all assaults of every foeman. Approach the bosom of the earth, the mother, this earth extending far and most propitious. Young, soft as wool to bounteous givers, may she preserve thee from the lap of dissolution. Open wide, O earth, press not heavily upon him, be easy of approach, hail him with kindly aid. As with a robe a mother hides her son, so shroud this man, O earth. Another of the poems is a frank dialogue between the first parents of mankind, the twin brother and sister, Yama and Yami. Yami tempts her brother to cohabit with her despite the divine prohibition of incest, and alleges that all she desires is the continuance of the race. Yama resists her on high moral grounds. She uses every inducement, and as a last weapon calls him a weakling. The story as we have it is left unfinished, and we may judge the issue only from circumstantial evidence. The loftiest of the poems is an astonishing creation hymn, in which a subtle pantheism, even a pious skepticism, appears in this oldest book of the most religious of peoples. Nor aught nor naught existed. Yon bright sky was not, nor heaven's broad woof, outstretched above. What covered all? What sheltered? What concealed? Was it the water's fathomless abyss? There was not death, yet there was naught immortal. There was no confine betwixt day and night. The only one breathed breathless by itself. Other than it, there nothing since has been. Darkness there was, and all at first was veiled in gloom profound, an ocean without light. The germ that still lay covered in the husk burst forth, one nature from the fervent heat. Then first came love upon it, the new spring of mind. Yea, poets in their hearts discerned, pondering this bond between created things and uncreated. Comes this spark from earth, piercing and all-pervading, or from heaven? Then seeds were sown, and mighty powers arose, nature below, and power and will above. Who knows the secret? Who proclaimed it here, whence this manifold creation sprang? The gods themselves came later into being. Who knows from whence this great creation sprang? He from whom all this great creation came, whether his will created or was mute, the most high seer that is in highest heaven, he knows it, or perchance even he knows not. It remained for the authors of the Upanishads to take up these problems and elaborate these hints in the most typical and perhaps the greatest product of the Hindu mind. 7. The philosophy of the Upanishads. The authors, their theme, intellect versus intuition, Atman, Brahman, Their identity, a description of God, salvation, influence of the Upanishads, Emerson on Brahma. In the whole world, said Schopenhauer, there is no study so beneficial and so elevating as that of the Upanishads. It has been the solace of my life. It will be the solace of my death. Here, excepting the moral fragments of Ptahhotep, are the oldest extant philosophy and psychology of our race, the surprisingly subtle and patient effort of man to understand the mind and the world, and their relation. The Upanishads are as old as Homer, and as modern as Kant. The word is composed of upa, near, and shad, to sit. From sitting near the teacher, the term came to mean the secret or esoteric doctrine confided by the master to his best and favorite pupils. There are 108 of these discourses, composed by various saints and sages between 800 and 500 BC. They represent not a consistent system of philosophy, but the opinions, aperçus, and lessons of many men, in whom philosophy and religion were still fused in the attempt to understand, and reverently unite with, the simple and essential reality underlying the superficial multiplicity of things. They are full of absurdities and contradictions, and occasionally they anticipate all the wind of Hegelian verbiage. Sometimes they present formulas as weird as that of Tom Sawyer for curing warts. Sometimes they impress us as the profoundest thinking in the history of philosophy. We know the names of many of the authors, but we know nothing of their lives, except what they occasionally reveal in their teachings. The most vivid figures among them are Yajnavalkya, the man, and Gargi, the woman who has the honor of being among the earliest of philosophers. Of the two, Yajnavalkya has the sharper tongue. His fellow teachers looked upon him as a dangerous innovator. His posterity made his doctrine the cornerstone of unchallengeable orthodoxy. He tells us how he tried to leave his two wives in order to become a hermit sage, and in the plea of his wife, Maitreya, that he should take her with him, we catch some feeling of the intensity with which India has for thousands of years pursued religion and philosophy. And then Yajnavalkya was about to commence another mode of life. Maitreya, said Yajnavalkya, lo, I am about to wander forth from this state. Let me make a final settlement for you and that Katyayani. Then spake Maitreyi, If now, sir, this whole earth filled with wealth were mine, would I now thereby be immortal? No, no, said Yajnavalkya. Of immortality there is no hope through wealth. Then spake Maitreyi, What should I do with that through which I may not be immortal? What you know, sir, that indeed explain to me. The theme of the Upanishads is all the mystery of this unintelligible world. Whence are we born? Where do we live, and whither do we go? O ye who know Brahman, tell us at whose command we abide here. Should time, or nature, or necessity, or chance, or the elements be considered the cause, or he who is called Purusha, the Supreme Spirit? India has had more than her share of men who wanted not millions, but answers to their questions. In the Maitreya Upanishad, we read of a king abandoning his kingdom and going into the forest to practice austerities, clear his mind for understanding, and solve the riddle of the universe. After 1,000 days of the king's penances, a sage, knower of the soul, came to him. You are one who knows its true nature, says the king. Do you tell us? Choose other desires, warns the sage. But the king insists, and in a passage that must have seemed Schopenhauerian to Schopenhauer, he voices that revulsion against life, that fear of being reborn which runs darkly through all Hindu thought. Sir, in this ill-smelling, unsubstantial body, which is a conglomerate of bone, skin, muscle, marrow, flesh, semen, blood, mucus, tears, rheum, feces, urine, wind, bile, and phlegm, what is the good of enjoyment of desire? In this body, which is afflicted with desire, anger, covetousness, delusion, fear, despondency, envy, separation from the desirable, union with the undesirable, hunger, thirst, senility, death, disease, sorrow, and the like, what is the good of enjoyment of desires? And we see that this whole world is decaying like these gnats, these mosquitoes, this grass, and these trees that arise and perish. Among other things, there is the drying up of great oceans, the falling away of mountain peaks, the deviation of the fixed pole star, the submergence of the earth. In this sort of cycle of existence, what is the good of enjoyment of desires, when, after a man has fed upon them, there is seen repeatedly his return here to the earth? The first lesson that the sages of the Upanishads teach their selected pupils is the inadequacy of the intellect. How can this feeble brain that aches at a little calculus ever hope to understand the complex immensity of which it is so transitory a fragment? Not that the intellect is useless. It has its modest place and serves us well when it deals with relations and things, but how it falters before the eternal, the infinite, or the elementally real. In the presence of that silent reality which supports all appearances and wells up in all consciousness, we need some other organ of perception and understanding than these senses and this reason. Not by learning is the Atman, or soul of the world, attained, not by genius and much knowledge of books. Let a Brahmin renounce learning and become as a child. Let him not seek after many words, for that is mere weariness of tongue. The highest understanding, as Spinoza was to say, is direct perception, immediate insight, and, as Bergson would say, intuition, the inward seeing of the mind that has deliberately closed, as far as it can, the portals of external sense. The self-evident Brahman pierced the openings of the senses so that they turned outwards. Therefore man looks outward, not inward into himself. Some wise man, however, with his eyes closed and wishing for immortality, saw the self behind. If on looking inward a man finds nothing at all, that may only prove the accuracy of his introspection. For no man need expect to find the eternal in himself if he is lost in the ephemeral and particular. Before that inner reality can be felt, one has to wash away from himself all evil doing and thinking, all turbulence of body and soul. For a fortnight one must fast, drinking only water. Then the mind, so to speak, is starved into tranquility and silence. The senses are cleansed and stilled. The spirit is left at peace to feel itself and that great ocean of soul of which it is a part. At last the individual ceases to be, and unity and reality appear. For it is not the individual self which the seer sees in this pure inward seeing. That individual self is but a series of brain or mental states. It is merely the body seen from within. What the seeker seeks is Atman, the self of all selves, the soul of all souls, the immaterial, formless absolute in which we bathe ourselves when we forget ourselves. This, then, is the first step in the secret doctrine, that the essence of our own self is not the body, or the mind, or the individual ego, but the silent and formless depth of being within us, Atman. The second step is Brahman, the one pervading, neuter, impersonal, all-embracing, underlying, intangible essence of the world, the real of the real, the unborn soul, undecaying, undying, the soul of all things as Atman is the soul of all souls, the one force that stands behind, beneath, and above all forces and all gods. Then Vidagdha Sakaila questioned him, "How many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" He answered, "As many as are mentioned in the hymn to all the gods, namely 303 and 3003. "Yes, but just how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 33. "Yes, but just how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 6. "Yes, but just how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 2. "Yes, but just how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 1.5. "Yes, but just how many gods are there, Yajnavalkya?" 1. The third step is the most important of all. Atman and Brahman are one. The non-individual soul or force within us is identical with the impersonal soul of the world. The Upanishads burn this doctrine into the pupil's mind with untiring, tiring repetition. Beyond all forms and veils, the subjective and the objective are one. We, in our de-individualized reality, and God as the essence of all things, are one. A teacher expresses it in a famous parable. "Bring hither a fig from there." "Here it is, sir." "Divide it." "It is divided, sir." "What do you see there?" "These rather fine seeds, sir." "Of these, please divide one." "It is divided, sir." "What do you see there?" "Nothing at all, sir." "Verily, my dear one, that finest essence which you do not perceive, verily from that finest essence this great tree thus arises. Believe me, my dear one, that which is the finest essence, this whole world has that as its soul. That is reality, that is Atman, Tattvamasi, that thou art, Shvetaketu. Do you, sir, cause me to understand even more?" "So be it, my dear one." This almost Hegelian dialectic of Atman, Brahman, and their synthesis is the essence of the Upanishads. Many other lessons are taught here, but they are subordinate. We find already in these discourses the belief in transmigration and the longing for release, moksha, from this heavy chain of reincarnations. Janaka, king of the Videhas, begs Yajnavalkya to tell him how rebirth can be avoided. Yajnavalkya answers by expounding yoga. Through the ascetic elimination of all personal desires, one may cease to be an individual fragment, unite himself in supreme bliss with the soul of the world, and so escape rebirth. Whereupon the king, metaphysically overcome, says, "I will give you, noble sir, the Videhas, and myself also to be your slave." It is an abstruse heaven, however, that Yajnavalkya promises the devotee, for in it there will be no individual consciousness, there will only be absorption into being, the reunion of the temporarily separated part with the whole. As flowing rivers disappear in the sea, losing their name and form, thus a wise man, freed from name and form, goes to the divine person who is beyond all. Such a theory of life and death will not please Western man, whose religion is as permeated with individualism as are his political and economic institutions. But it has satisfied the philosophical Hindu mind with astonishing continuity. We shall find this philosophy of the Upanishads, this monistic theology, this mystic and impersonal immortality, dominating Hindu thought from Buddha to Gandhi, from Yajnavalkya to Tagore. To our own day, the Upanishads have remained to India what the New Testament has been to Christendom, a noble creed occasionally practiced and generally revered. Even in Europe and America, this wistful theosophy has won millions upon millions of followers, from lonely women and tired men to Schopenhauer and Emerson. Who would have thought that the great American philosopher of individualism would give perfect expression to the Hindu conviction that individuality is a delusion? Brahma. If the red slayer thinks he slays, or if the slain thinks he is slain, they know not well the subtle ways I keep and pass and turn again. Far or forgot to me is near. Shadow and sunlight are the same. The vanished gods to me appear, and one to me are shame and fame. They reckon ill who leave me out. When me they fly, I am the wings. I am the doubter and the doubt, and I the hymn the Brahman sings. Chapter 15. Buddha. 1. The heretics. Skeptics, nihilists, sophists, atheists, materialists, religions without a god. That there were doubters even in the days of the Upanishads appears from the Upanishads themselves. Sometimes the sages ridiculed the priests, as when the Chandogya Upanishad likens the orthodox clergy of the time to a procession of dogs, each holding the tail of its predecessor and saying piously, "Om, let us eat. Om, let us drink." The Swansaved Upanishad announces that there is no God, no heaven, no hell, no reincarnation, no world, that the Vedas and Upanishads are the work of conceited fools, that ideas are illusions and all words untrue, that people deluded by flowery speech cling to gods and temples and holy men, though in reality there is no difference between Vishnu and a dog. And the story is told of Virokana, who lived as a pupil for 32 years with the great god Prajapati himself, received much instruction about the self which is free from evil, ageless, deathless, sorrowless, hungerless, thirstless, whose desire is the real, and then suddenly returned to earth and preached this highly scandalizing doctrine. One's self is to be made happy here on earth. One's self is to be waited upon. He who makes himself happy here on earth, who waits upon himself, obtains both worlds, this world and the next. Perhaps the good Brahmins who have preserved the history of their country have deceived us a little about the unanimity of Hindu mysticism and piety. Indeed, as scholarship unearths some of the less respectable figures in Indian philosophy before Buddha, a picture takes form in which, along with saints meditating on Brahman, we find a variety of persons who despised all priests, doubted all gods, and bore without trepidation the name of Gnostics, no-sayers, nihilists. Sangaya, the agnostic, would neither admit nor deny life after death. He questioned the possibility of knowledge and limited philosophy to the pursuit of peace. Purana Kashyapa refused to accept moral distinctions and taught that the soul is a passive slave to chance. Maskarin Gosala held that fate determines everything, regardless of the merits of men. Ajita Kasakambalin reduced man to earth, water, fire, and wind, and said, "Fools and wise alike on the dissolution of the body are cut off, annihilated, and after death they are not." The author of the Ramayana draws a typical skeptic in Jabali, who ridicules Rama for rejecting a kingdom in order to keep a vow. Jabali, a learned Brahmin and a sophist skilled in word, questioned faith and law and duty, spake to young Ayodhya's lord. Wherefore, Rama, idle maxims cloud thy heart and warp thy mind, maxims which mislead the simple and the thoughtless humankind? Ah, I weep for erring mortals, who, on erring duty bent, sacrifice this dear enjoyment till their barren life is spent, who to gods and to the fathers vainly still their offerings make, waste of food, for God nor Father doth our pious homage take. And the food by one partaken, can it nourish other men? Food bestowed upon a Brahmin, can it serve our fathers then? Crafty priests have forged these maxims, and with selfish objects say, Make thy gifts and do thy penance, leave thy worldly wealth and pray. There is no hereafter, Rama, vain the hope and creed of men. Seek the pleasures of the present, spurn illusions poor and vain. When Buddha grew to manhood, he found the halls, the streets, the very woods of northern India ringing with philosophic disputation, mostly of an atheistic and materialistic trend. The later Upanishads and the oldest Buddhist books are full of references to these heretics. A large class of traveling sophists, the paribhajaka, or wanderers, spent the better part of every year in passing from locality to locality, seeking pupils or antagonists in philosophy. Some of them taught logic as the art of proving anything, and earned for themselves the titles of hair-splitters and eel-wrigglers. Others demonstrated the non-existence of God and the inexpediency of virtue. Large audiences gathered to hear such lectures and debates. Great halls were built to accommodate them, and sometimes princes offered rewards for those who should emerge victorious from these intellectual jousts. It was an age of amazingly free thought and of 1,000 experiments in philosophy. Not much has come down to us from these skeptics, and their memory has been preserved almost exclusively through the diatribes of their enemies. The oldest name among them is Brihaspati, but his nihilistic sutras have perished, and all that remains of him is a poem denouncing the priests in language free from all metaphysical obscurity. No heaven exists, no final liberation, no soul, no other world, no rites of caste. The triple Veda, triple self-command, and all the dust and ashes of repentance, these yield a means of livelihood for men devoid of intellect and manliness. How can this body, when reduced to dust, revisit earth? And if a ghost can pass to other worlds, why does not strong affection for those he leaves behind attract him back? The costly rites enjoined for those who die are but a means of livelihood devised by sacerdotal cunning, nothing more. While life endures, let life be spent in ease and merriment. Let a man borrow money from all his friends and feast on melted butter. Out of the aphorisms of Brihaspati came a whole school of Hindu materialists, named, after one of them, Charvakas. They laughed at the notion that the Vedas were divinely revealed truth. Truth, they argued, can never be known except through the senses. Even reason is not to be trusted, for every inference depends for its validity not only upon accurate observation and correct reasoning, but also upon the assumption that the future will behave like the past. And of this, as Hume was to say, there can be no certainty. What is not perceived by the senses, said the Charvakas, does not exist. Therefore the soul is a delusion, and Atman is humbug. We do not observe in experience or history any interposition of supernatural forces in the world. All phenomena are natural. Only simpletons trace them to demons or gods. Matter is the one reality. The body is a combination of atoms. The mind is merely matter thinking. The body, not the soul, feels, sees, hears, thinks. Who has seen the soul existing in a state separate from the body? There is no immortality, no rebirth. Religion is an aberration, a disease, or a chicanery. The hypothesis of a god is useless for explaining or understanding the world. Men think religion necessary only because, being accustomed to it, they feel a sense of loss and an uncomfortable void when the growth of knowledge destroys this faith. Morality, too, is natural. It is a social convention and convenience, not a divine command. Nature is indifferent to good and bad, virtue and vice, and lets the sun shine indiscriminately upon knaves and saints. If nature has any ethical quality at all, it is that of transcendent immorality. There is no need to control instinct and passion, for these are the instructions of nature to men. Virtue is a mistake. The purpose of life is living, and the only wisdom is happiness. This revolutionary philosophy of the Charvakas put an end to the age of the Vedas and the Upanishads. It weakened the hold of the Brahmins on the mind of India, and left in Hindu society a vacuum which almost compelled the growth of a new religion. But the materialists had done their work so thoroughly that both of the new religions which arose to replace the old Vedic faith were, anomalous though it may sound, atheistic religions, devotions without a god. Both belonged to the Nastika or nihilistic movement, and both were originated not by the Brahmin priests, but by members of the Kshatriya warrior caste, in a reaction against sacerdotal ceremonialism and theology. With the coming of Jainism and Buddhism, a new epoch began in the history of India. 2. Mahavira and the Jains. The great hero, the Jain creed, atheistic polytheism, asceticism, salvation by suicide, later history of the Jains. About the middle of the 6th century B.C., a boy was born to a wealthy nobleman of the Lichchavi tribe in a suburb of the city of Vaishali, in what is now the province of Bihar. His parents, though wealthy, belonged to a sect that looked upon rebirth as a curse and upon suicide as a blessed privilege. When their son had reached his 31st year, they ended their lives by voluntary starvation. The young man, moved to the depths of his soul, renounced the world and its ways, divested himself of all clothing, and wandered through western Bengal as an ascetic, seeking self-purification and understanding. After 13 years of such self-denial, he was hailed by a group of disciples as a Jinnah, conqueror, that is, one of the great teachers whom fate, they believed, had ordained to appear at regular intervals to enlighten the people of India. They rechristened their leader Mahavira, or the great hero, and took to themselves, from their most characteristic belief, the name of Jains. Mahavira organized a celibate clergy and an order of nuns, and when he died, aged 72, left behind him 14,000 devotees. Gradually, this sect developed one of the strangest bodies of doctrine in all the history of religion. They began with a realistic logic in which knowledge was described as confined to the relative and temporal. Nothing is true, they taught, except from one point of view. From other points of view it would probably be false. They were fond of quoting the story of the 6 blind men who laid hands on different parts of an elephant. He who held the ear thought that the elephant was a great winnowing fan. He who held the leg said the animal was a big round pillar. All judgments, therefore, are limited and conditional. Absolute truth comes only to the periodic redeemers, or jinnahs. Nor can the Vedas help. They are not inspired by God, if only for the reason that there is no God. It is not necessary, said the Jains, to assume a creator or first cause. Any child can refute that assumption by showing that an uncreated creator, or a causeless cause, is just as hard to understand as an uncaused or uncreated world. It is more logical to believe that the universe has existed from all eternity, and that its infinite changes and revolutions are due to the inherent powers of nature, rather than to the intervention of a deity. But the climate of India does not lend itself to a persistently naturalistic creed. The Jains, having emptied the sky of God, soon peopled it again with the deified saints of Jain history and legend. These they worshipped with devotion and ceremony, but even them they considered subject to transmigration and decay, and not in any sense as the creators or rulers of the world. Nor were the Jains materialists. They accepted a dualistic distinction of mind and matter everywhere. In all things, even in stones and metals, there were souls. Any soul that achieved a blameless life became a Paramatman, or supreme soul, and was spared reincarnation for a while. When its reward had equaled its merit, however, it was born into the flesh again. Only the highest and most perfect spirits could achieve complete release. These were the Arhats, or supreme lords, who lived like Epicurus's deities in some distant and shadowy realm, impotent to affect the affairs of men, but happily removed from all chances of rebirth. The road to release, said the Jains, was by ascetic penances and complete ahimsa, abstinence from injury to any living thing. Every Jain ascetic must take 5 vows: not to kill anything, not to lie, not to take what is not given, to preserve chastity, and to renounce pleasure in all external things. Sense pleasure, they thought, is always a sin. The ideal is indifference to pleasure and pain, and independence of all external objects. Agriculture is forbidden to the Jain because it tears up the soil and crushes insects or worms. The good Jain rejects honey as the life of the bee, strains water lest he destroy creatures lurking in it when he drinks, veils his mouth for fear of inhaling and killing the organisms of the air, screens his lamp to protect insects from the flame, and sweeps the ground before him as he walks lest his naked foot should trample out some life. The Jain must never slaughter or sacrifice an animal, and if he is thoroughgoing, he establishes hospitals or asylums, as at Ahmedabad, for old or injured beasts. The only life that he may kill is his own. His doctrine highly approves of suicide, especially by slow starvation, for this is the greatest victory of the spirit over the blind will to live. Many Jains have died in this way, and the leaders of the sect are said to leave the world even today by self-starvation. A religion based upon so profound a doubt and denial of life might have found some popular support in a country where life has always been hard. But even in India, its extreme asceticism limited its appeal. From the beginning, the Jains were a select minority, and though Yuan Chuang found them numerous and powerful in the 7th century, it was a passing zenith in a quiet career. About 79 A.D., a great schism divided them on the question of nudity. From that time on, the Jains have belonged either to the Shwetambara, white-robed sect, or to the Digambaras, sky-clad or nude. Today, both sects wear the usual clothing of their place and time. Only their saints go about the streets naked. These sects have further sects to divide them. The Digambaras have 4, the Shwetambaras 84. Together they number only 1,300,000 adherents out of a population of 320 million souls. Gandhi has been strongly influenced by the Jain sect, has accepted ahimsa as the basis of his policy and his life, contents himself with a loincloth, and may starve himself to death. The Jains may yet name him as one of their jinnas, another incarnation of the Great Spirit that periodically has made flesh to redeem the world. 3. The Legend of Buddha. The background of Buddhism, the miraculous birth, youth, the sorrows of life, flight, ascetic years, enlightenment, a vision of nirvana. It is difficult to see across 2,500 years what were the economic, political, and moral conditions that called forth religions so ascetic and pessimistic as Jainism and Buddhism. Doubtless much material progress had been made since the establishment of the Aryan rule in India. Great cities like Pataliputra and Vaishala had been built. Industry and trade had created wealth. Wealth had generated leisure. Leisure had developed knowledge and culture. Probably it was the riches of India that produced the Epicureanism and materialism of the 7th and 6th centuries before Christ. Religion does not prosper under prosperity. The senses liberate themselves from pious restraints and formulate philosophies that will justify their liberation. As in the China of Confucius and the Greece of Protagoras, not to speak of our own day, so in Buddha's India the intellectual decay of the old religion had begotten ethical skepticism and moral anarchy. Jainism and Buddhism, though impregnated with the melancholy atheism of a disillusioned age, were religious reactions against the hedonistic creeds of an emancipated and worldly leisure class. Hindu tradition describes Buddha's father, Suddhodana, as a man of the world, member of the Gautama clan of the proud Shakya tribe, and prince or king of Kapilavastu at the foot of the Himalayan range. In truth, however, we know nothing certain about Buddha, and if we give here the stories that have gathered about his name, it is not because these are history, but because they are an essential part of Hindu literature and Asiatic religion. Scholarship assigns his birth to approximately 563 B.C. and can say no more. Legend takes up the tale and reveals to us in what strange ways men may be conceived. At that time, says one of the Jataka books, in the city of Kapilavastu, the festival of the full moon had been proclaimed. Queen Maya, from the 7th day before the full moon, celebrated the festival without intoxicants and with abundance of garlands and perfumes. Rising early on the 7th day, she bathed in scented water and bestowed a great gift of 400,000 pieces as alms. Fully adorned, she ate of choice food, took upon herself the aposata vows, entered her adorned state bedchamber, lay down on the bed, and, falling asleep, dreamt this dream. 4 great kings, it seemed, raised her together with the bed, and taking her to the Himalayas, set her on the Manasila tableland. Then their queens came, and took her to the Anotara lake, bathed her to remove human stain, robed her in heavenly clothing, anointed her with perfumes, and bedecked her with divine flowers. Not far away is a silver mountain, and thereon a golden mansion. There they prepared a divine bed with head to the east, and laid her upon it. Now the Bodhisattva became a white elephant. Not far from there is a golden mountain, and going there he descended from it, alighted on the silver mountain, approaching it from the direction of the north. In his trunk, which was like a silver rope, he held a white lotus. Then, trumpeting, he entered the golden mansion, made a rightwise circle 3 times around his mother's bed, smote her right side, and appeared to enter her womb. Thus he received a new existence. The next day the queen awoke and told her dream to the king. The king summoned 64 eminent Brahmins, showed them honor, and satisfied them with excellent food and other presents. Then, when they were satisfied with these pleasures, he caused the dream to be told and asked what would happen. The Brahmins said, "Be not anxious, O king. The queen has conceived, a male, not a female, and thou shalt have a son. And if he dwells in a house, he will become a king, a universal monarch. If he leaves his house and goes forth from the world, he will become a Buddha, a remover in the world of the veil, of ignorance." Queen Maya, bearing the Bodhisattva for 10 months like oil in a bowl, when her time was come, desired to go to her relative's house, and addressed King Shuddhodana, "I wish, O king, to go to Devadaha, the city of my family." The king approved, and caused the road from Kapilavastu to Devadaha to be made smooth, and adorned with vessels filled with plantains, flags, and banners, and seating her in a golden palanquin, borne by 1,000 courtiers, sent her with a great retinue. Between the two cities, and belonging to the inhabitants of both, is a pleasure grove of sal trees, named the Lumbini Grove. At that time, from the roots to the tips of the branches, it was one mass of flowers. When the queen saw it, a desire to sport in the grove arose. She went to the foot of a great sal tree, and desired to seize a branch. The branch, like the tip of a supple reed, bent down and came within reach of her hand. Stretching out her hand, she received the branch. Thereupon she was shaken with the throes of birth. So the multitude set up a curtain for her and retired. Holding the branch, and even while standing, she was delivered. And as other beings when born come forth stained with impure matter, not so the Bodhisattva. But the Bodhisattva, like a preacher of the doctrine descending from the seat of doctrine, like a man descending stairs, stretched out his 2 hands and feet, and standing unsoiled and unstained by any impurity, shining like a jewel laid on Benares cloth, descended from his mother. It must further be understood that at Buddha's birth a great light appeared in the sky. The deaf heard, the dumb spoke, the lame were made straight, gods bent down from heaven to assist him, and kings came from afar to welcome him. Legend paints a colorful picture of the splendor and luxury that surrounded him in his youth. He dwelt as a happy prince in 3 palaces, like a god, protected by his loving father from all contact with the pain and grief of human life. 40,000 dancing girls entertained him, and when he came of age, 500 ladies were sent to him that he might choose one as his wife. As a member of the Kshatriya caste, he received careful training in the military arts, but also he sat at the feet of sages and made himself master of all the philosophical theories current in his time. He married, became a happy father, and lived in wealth, peace, and good repute. One day, says pious tradition, he went forth from his palace into the streets among the people, and saw an old man, and on another day he went forth and saw a sick man, and on a third day he went forth and saw a dead man. He himself, in the holy books of his disciples, tells the tale movingly. Then, O monks, did I, endowed with such majesty and such excessive delicacy, think thus. An ignorant ordinary person who is himself subject to old age, not beyond the sphere of old age, on seeing an old man is troubled, ashamed, and disgusted, extending the thought to himself. I too am subject to old age, not beyond the sphere of old age. And should I, who am subject to old age, on seeing an old man, be troubled, ashamed, and disgusted? This seemed to me not fitting. As I thus reflected, all the elation in youth suddenly disappeared. Thus, O monks, before my enlightenment, being myself subject to birth, I sought out the nature of birth. Being subject to old age, I sought out the nature of old age, of sickness, of sorrow, of impurity. Then I thought, what if I, being myself subject to birth, were to seek out the nature of birth? And, having seen the wretchedness of the nature of birth, were to seek out the unborn, the supreme peace of nirvana. Death is the origin of all religions, and perhaps if there had been no death, there would have been no gods. To Buddha, these sights were the beginnings of enlightenment. Like one overcome with conversion, he suddenly resolved to leave his father, his wife, and his newborn son, and become an ascetic in the desert. During the night he stole into his wife's room, and looked for the last time upon his son, Rahula. Just then, says the Buddhist scriptures, in a passage sacred to all followers of Gautama, a lamp of scented oil was burning. On the bed strewn with heaps of jessamine and other flowers, the mother of Rahula was sleeping, with her hand on her son's head. The Bodhisattva, standing with his foot on the threshold, looked and thought, if I move aside the queen's hand and take my son, the queen will awake, and this will be an obstacle to my going. When I have become a Buddha, I will come back and see him. And he descended from the palace. In the dark of the morning he rode out of the city on his horse Kantaka, with his charioteer Chauna clinging desperately to the tail. Then Mara, prince of evil, appeared to him and tempted him, offering him great empires. But Buddha refused, and riding on, crossed a broad river with one mighty leap. A desire to look again at his native city arose in him, but he did not turn. Then the great earth turned round, so that he might not have to look back. He stopped at a place called Uruvela. There, he says, I thought to myself, truly this is a pleasant spot and a beautiful forest. Clear flows the river, and pleasant are the bathing places. All round are meadows and villages. Here he devoted himself to the severest forms of asceticism. For 6 years he tried the ways of the yogis who had already appeared on the Indian scene. He lived on seeds and grass, and for one period he fed on dung. Gradually he reduced his food to a grain of rice each day. He wore haircloth, plucked out his hair and beard for torture's sake, stood for long hours or lay upon thorns. He let the dust and dirt accumulate upon his body until he looked like an old tree. He frequented a place where human corpses were exposed to be eaten by birds and beasts, and slept among the rotting carcasses. And again, he tells us, I thought, what if now I set my teeth, press my tongue to my palate, and restrain, crush, and burn out my mind with my mind? I did so, and sweat flowed from my armpits. Then I thought, what if I now practiced trance without breathing? So I restrained breathing in and out from mouth and nose. And as I did so, there was a violent sound of winds issuing from my ears. Just as if a strong man were to crush one's head with the point of a sword, even so did violent winds disturb my head. Then I thought, what if I were to take food only in small amounts, as much as my hollowed palm would hold, juice of beans, vetches, chickpeas, or pulse? My body became extremely lean. The mark of my seat was like a camel's footprint through the little food. The bones of my spine, when bent and straightened, were like a row of spindles through the little food. Also in a deep well, the deep low-lying sparkling of the waters is seen, so in my eye sockets was seen the deep, low-lying sparkling of my eyes through the little food. And as a bitter gourd, cut off raw, is cracked and withered through rain and sun, so was the skin of my head withered through the little food. When I thought I would touch the skin of my stomach, I actually took hold of my spine. When I thought I would ease myself, I thereupon fell prone through the little food. To relieve my body, I stroked my limbs with my hand, and as I did so, the decayed hairs fell from my body through the little food. But one day the thought came to Buddha that self-mortification was not the way. Perhaps he was unusually hungry on that day, or some memory of loveliness stirred within him. He perceived that no new enlightenment had come to him from these austerities. By this severity I do not attain superhuman, truly noble knowledge and insight. On the contrary, a certain pride in his self-torture had poisoned any holiness that might have grown from it. He abandoned his asceticism, went to sit under a shade-giving tree, and remained there steadfast and motionless, resolving never to leave that seat until enlightenment came to him. What, he asked himself, was the source of human sorrow, suffering, sickness, old age, and death? Suddenly a vision came to him of the infinite succession of deaths and births in the stream of life. He saw every death frustrated with new birth, every peace and joy balanced with new desire and discontent, new disappointment, new grief and pain. Thus, with mind concentrated, purified, cleansed, I directed my mind to the passing away and rebirth of beings. With divine, purified, superhuman vision, I saw beings passing away and being reborn, low and high, of good and bad color, in happy or miserable existences, according to their karma, according to that universal law by which every act of good or of evil will be rewarded or punished in this life or in some later incarnation of the soul. It was the vision of this apparently ridiculous succession of deaths and births that made Buddha scorn human life. This book is continued at this point on the other side of this cassette. Please reverse or turn the cassette over now.